Imagine standing in a penthouse worth millions, just praying for a pepperoni pizza before you collapse from exhaustion. You're a broke baker drowning in debt, wearing sweatpants in a stranger's mansion. He's the billionaire owner who smells like cold wind, cedar, and absolute danger. You think it's just an awkward mix-up, but what if that delivery was actually a trap set by a ruthless alpha wolf hunting his mate? Welcome to a world where corporate power masks primal hunger and complaining about the meat gets you claimed by the beast. If you love high-stakes shifter romance that bites back, please hit that like button, subscribe to Atlena's Romantasy collection for your next obsession, and comment below where you're listening from tonight. Let the hunt begin. Chapter 1. The Delivery. The penthouse was silent. Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the expensive kind. The air in the summit suite of the St. James Tower was filtered, chilled, and smelled faintly of ozone and nothingness. Tess Bennett kicked off her sneakers, letting them land on the pristine marble floor with a satisfying thud. "Ridiculous," she muttered, her voice echoing in the cavernous living room. "Who lives like this? It's like a dentist's office had a baby with a villain's lair." She wasn't supposed to be comfortable here. She was the temporary house sitter, a favor for a friend of a friend who managed the property. Her job was simple: water the 3 surviving succulents, accept packages, and don't touch the liquor cabinet. She had already failed the last instruction. A glass of very old, very smooth amber liquid sat on the chrome coaster near her elbow. But liquid courage wasn't enough. She needed food. "Come on, Tony," she whispered, checking her phone for the 3rd time. "Daddy needs a pepperoni fix." Her stomach gave a traitorous growl. She had spent the last 10 hours on her feet in the cramped kitchen of the Savory Crumb, piping frosting onto 300 cupcakes for a bride who had changed her color scheme from blush to bashful at the last minute. Tess was exhausted. She was hungry. And she was currently wearing oversized sweatpants and a t-shirt that said, "We'll bake for cash." The elevator chime dinged softly. Tess perked up, scrambling off the massive leather sofa. Finally. She padded across the floor in her socks, sliding slightly on the polished stone. The elevator door slid open, revealing a tall, broad-shouldered figure silhouetted against the light of the hallway. He was holding a flat, square cardboard box. The pizza. "Thank God," Tess groaned, marching right up to him. She didn't look at his face. She was focused entirely on the box in his hand. "You have no idea how long I've been waiting. I was about to start eating the decorative soap." The man didn't move. He stood like a statue, filling the doorway in a way that felt oddly oppressive. "I didn't think the elevator required a code for deliveries," a deep voice rumbled. It wasn't a question. It was a baritone sound that vibrated in Tess's chest, dark and textured like gravel crunching under tires. "The concierge let you up," Tess dismissed, reaching out and grabbing the edge of the box. "I told him it was an emergency. Pizza is always an emergency." The man didn't let go. Tess tugged. The box stayed firm in his grip. She looked up, annoyance flaring in her chest. "Look, buddy, I tipped on the app. Just hand over the..." The words died in her throat. This was not the delivery guy. Unless Tony Slice had started hiring models who looked like they strangled bears for recreation. He was massive. Not just tall, but dense with muscle that strained against a charcoal suit jacket. His hair was dark, cut short and severe, and his jawline was sharp enough to cut glass. But it was his eyes that froze her. They were dark, nearly black, and they were staring at her with an intensity that made the hair on her arm stand up. "You tipped on the app," he repeated, his tone flat. "Yes," Tess said, though her voice wavered. She gave the box another tug. "Can I have my dinner, please?" He stared at her for a long beat, his nostrils flaring slightly. He looked at the box in his hand, which, she realized now, was a high-end laptop case, not a pizza box. Then he looked at the actual pizza box sitting on the floor behind him, which he must have stepped over. He bent down, movement fluid, predatory, and scooped up the greasy cardboard box from the floor. He held it out to her, his expression unreadable. "Your dinner," he said. Tess snatched it. "Thanks, you can go now." He didn't move. He just watched her, a strange heat radiating from him that had nothing to do with the building's climate control. Chapter 2. The Complaint. Tess didn't wait for him to leave. She marched back to the kitchen island, flipping the lid of the box open. The smell of grease and tomato sauce filled the sterile room. She frowned. "Are you kidding me?" She sighed, staring at the pie. The man was still standing by the elevator. He hadn't left. In fact, he had walked further into the room, closing the distance between them with silent, stalking steps. "Is there a problem?" he asked. "Yes, there's a problem," Tess grumbled, poking a lonely slice. "I ordered a meat lovers. This is a meat acquaintance. Look at this." She pointed an accusing finger at the pizza. "There are exactly 3 pepperonis on this slice. 3! That's not a topping. That's a garnish. It's disrespectful." She looked up at him, expecting him to be confused or indifferent. Instead, he was watching her mouth with a focus that made her breath hitch. "You're complaining about the sausage," he stated dryly. "I'm complaining about the lack of it," Tess corrected, her hunger making her bold. "I paid for the full experience. I want abundance. I want flavor. I want to regret this tomorrow. This," she gestured to the sad pizza, "this is pathetic." The man took another step closer. The air in the room seemed to get heavier, charged with static. He placed his laptop case on the counter with a deliberate, heavy thud. "You have very high standards for a trespasser," he murmured. Tess blinked. "Excuse me? I don't recall hiring a staff member with your—" His eyes raked over her messy hair and the Will Bake for Cash shirt. "Aesthetic." "I'm house-sitting," Tess said defensively, crossing her arms. "For the owner, who is currently in Tokyo, which is where you should be, considering you're not the pizza guy." A corner of his mouth ticked up. It wasn't a smile, it was a warning. "I came back early," he said. Tokyo was boring. The realization hit Tess slowly, like cold syrup. The suit, the attitude, the fact that the elevator obeyed him without a keycard. "You're him," she whispered. "Declan St. James." He introduced himself, extending a hand. His palm was large, calloused. "And this is my kitchen." Tess stared at his hand, then at the pizza, then back at his face. Mortification crashed over her. She had just lectured the billionaire owner of the building about pepperoni while wearing sweatpants in his living room. She didn't shake his hand. She stepped back, clutching the pizza box like a shield. I should go," she stammered. "I'll just pack up." "And leave the pizza?" Declan asked, his voice dropping an octave. He leaned forward, bracing his hands on the marble island, trapping her in his space. He smelled incredible, like burnt cedar and cold wind. It made her head spin. "The pizza is a disappointment anyway," she muttered, trying to regain some dignity. "Like I said, not enough meat." Declan's eyes darkened. A flash of something gold flickered in his irises before disappearing. He leaned in close, his mouth inches from her ear. "If you're still hungry," he whispered, the sound vibrating through her entire skeleton. "Stay, I'll show you real meat." Tess's heart hammered against her ribs. The innuendo was thick enough to cut with a knife, but his face was dead serious. He wasn't flirting, he looked like he wanted to devour her. "Is that a threat or an offer?" she squeaked. Declan pulled back, straightening his suit jacket. The mask of the CEO slid back into place, covering whatever wild thing had just peeked out. "It's a dinner invitation," he said coolly. "Since you've invaded my home, the least you can do is join me for a meal that doesn't come in a cardboard box." Chapter 3. The Scent. Declan St. James was not a man who panicked. Panic was for prey. He was a predator. But right now, standing in his own kitchen, he was fighting a war on 2 fronts. First, his wolf was pacing inside his chest, clawing at his ribs, howling, "Mine." Second, the woman in front of him smelled like heaven. It wasn't a perfume, it was biological. She smelled like yeast and warm vanilla, underlined by a sharp, citrusy tang that made his mouth water. It was the scent of a mate. He had spent 10 years avoiding this. He didn't want a mate. Mates made you weak. Mates made you vulnerable. He had an empire to run, a pack to discipline, and enemies to crush. He didn't have time for a woman in sweatpants who argued about pepperoni. "I can't stay," Tess said, breaking his train of thought. She was backing away toward the guest room where she dumped her bag. "This is unprofessional. I'm the help, sort of." Sit down, Declan commanded. It was a slip. He used the voice, the alpha tone that compelled obedience. Tess froze. Her eyes went wide. For a second, he thought she would bow or bare her neck. Instead, her eyes narrowed. Don't bark at me. Declan blinked. She resisted the voice? That was impossible. Unless the bond was already so strong that she viewed him as an equal. Or she was just incredibly stubborn. Looking at the set of her jaw, he guessed it was the latter. I didn't bark, he corrected, keeping his voice level. I insisted. It's late. It's raining. You're not leaving until morning. I have a dog, she countered. Gus. He needs to be walked. He has a very strict bladder schedule. My driver will fetch him, Declan said, pulling his phone out. Address? You can't just kidnap my dog because you came home early. I am not kidnapping him. I am upgrading his accommodations. Declan tapped a message to his head of security. And I'm not asking, Tess. He knew her name. He'd seen it on the house-sitting roster his assistant had sent him weeks ago. Tess Bennett, 24, clean background check, owner of a struggling catering business. He hadn't cared then. He cared now. He walked around the island, moving into her personal space again. He needed to test this. He needed to see if the static was real. Why are you looking at me like that? Tess asked, her voice breathless. She backed up until her hips hit the counter. Like what? Like I'm the steak and you're the knife. Declan let out a short, rough laugh. An apt metaphor. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face. He wanted to tuck a loose curl behind her ear. He wanted to trace the line of her throat. He wanted to bite her. He pulled his hand back at the last second. Touching her would trigger the static. If he shocked her now, she'd run. And he needed her to stay. Not just because his wolf was screaming, but because an idea was forming in the ruthless, calculating part of his human brain. I have a proposition for you, Tess, he said softly. Chapter 4, The Problem. The following morning, the penthouse looked different. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Tess sat at the long dining table, nursing a cup of coffee that tasted better than anything she had ever brewed in her life. Gus, her mournful-looking basset hound, was currently asleep on a velvet rug that probably cost more than her car. Traitor, she whispered to the dog. Declan walked in. He was already dressed for the day in a navy suit, looking sharp, rested, and terrifyingly handsome. Good morning, he said, placing a tablet in front of her. Morning, Tess mumbled. Thanks for not murdering me in my sleep. The day is young, Declan replied. He pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat. Read. Tess looked at the tablet. It was a news article. St. James Holdings stock dips amid CEO's solitary lifestyle rumors. Board demands stability. Okay, Tess said slowly. Rich people problems. Why am I reading this? My board of directors is old-fashioned, Declan explained, his fingers drumming on the table. They believe a man who cannot manage a household cannot manage a billion-dollar merger. They want me settled, married, or at least publicly committed. Get a girlfriend, then, Tess shrugged, taking a sip of coffee. You're rich and you have, well, the face. I'm sure there's a line. I don't want a partner, Declan said, his voice cold. I want a solution. He looked at her then, really looked at her. I need a fiancé, Tess, for 3 months, until the merger with the Nordic Group is finalized. Tess choked on her coffee. She coughed, sputtering, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. I'm sorry, did you just ask me to fake marry you? Fake engage, he corrected. Marriage is messy. Engagements can be broken quietly. You're insane, she laughed, standing up. I'm a caterer, Declan. I smell like vanilla extract and despair. I don't fit in your world. That's exactly why you're perfect, he said, standing up to match her height. You're an outsider. You have no connections to my social circle. No one will question your motives because they won't know who you are. And unlike the women in my circle, you are distinct. Distinct? Tess raised an eyebrow. Is that billionaire for loud? It's billionaire for you won't bore me to death. He took a step closer. I looked into your business, Tess. The savory crumb. You're 3 months behind on your business loan payments. The bank is threatening to foreclose on your kitchen. Your van needs a new transmission. You're drowning. Tess stiffened. The air left her lungs. He was right. She was 1 bad month away from closing down. "That's none of your business," she snapped. "Make it my business," he countered. "Give me 3 months. Be the doting fiancé, smile for the cameras, attend the galas. In return, I pay off your debts. All of them. And I buy you a new kitchen." Chapter 5. The Contract. The silence in the room was heavy. Tess looked at Gus, who let out a long, wheezing snore. She looked at Declan. He was watching her with that dark, unreadable expression, like a poker player holding a royal flush. "A new kitchen?" she asked, her voice small. "State of the art," Declan confirmed. "Walk-in fridges, industrial ovens, in a building you own, not rent." It was a deal with the devil. She knew it, but the devil was offering her a lifeline. "What are the rules?" Tess asked, crossing her arms. "Because I've seen movies. I know how this goes. You get weird or possessive or—" "Strictly business," Declan interrupted smoothly. He slid a paper contract across the table. He had clearly prepared it overnight. Clause 4. No emotional entanglements. Clause 7. Public displays of affection are limited to hand-holding and the occasional cheek kiss for cameras. Tess picked up the contract. She skimmed the legal jargon. It looked airtight. "And private displays?" she asked, glancing up at him. "Non-existent," Declan lied. She could see the muscle in his jaw jump. "We live separate lives under the same roof. You stay in the guest wing. I stay in the master. We are roommates with a PR problem." Tess bit her lip. It was crazy. It was dangerous. But it was also the answer to every prayer she'd whispered to the universe for the last 2 years. "And if I say no? Then you walk out that door with your dog and your pizza and you never see me again." Tess looked at the contract again. She thought about the leak in her kitchen ceiling. She thought about the crushing weight of her student loans. She picked up the heavy fountain pen sitting on the table. "One condition," she said. "Name it." "I cook. I'm not eating your rich people kale smoothies for 3 months. I use the kitchen and you eat what I make." Declan's eyes flashed. For a second, he looked almost hungry. "Agreed," he said. Tess signed her name. The ink was dark and permanent. As soon as she lifted the pen, Declan snatched the paper away, as if afraid she would change her mind. "Welcome to the family, darling," he said, his voice dropping into that smoky, rough register again. "Don't call me darling," Tess warned, pointing the pen at him. "It's weird." "Get used to it," Declan said, turning away to hide the triumph on his face. "We have a gala in 3 days. You need a dress. And Tess?" "Yeah?" He looked back over his shoulder. "Wear comfortable shoes. You're going to be standing next to me for a long time." Tess watched him walk away. She shivered. The air conditioning was set to 70, but she suddenly felt very, very hot. She looked down at Gus. "I think we just made a mistake, buddy." Gus didn't answer. He just farted in his sleep. Chapter 6. The Ring and the Check. The guest suite of the penthouse had been invaded. That was the only word for it. An army of stylists, armed with steamers and garment bags, had descended upon Tess at 8 a.m. sharp. Currently, she was standing on a pedestal in the center of the room, while a woman named Chloe pinned a hem near her ankle with terrifying precision. "Don't move," Chloe warned, her mouth full of pins. "I'm trying," Tess muttered, holding her breath. "But this dress is structured like a suspension bridge. I think it's rearranging my internal organs." The dress was a midnight blue velvet number that hugged every curve she possessed before flaring out at the knee. It was elegant, expensive, and completely terrifying. It was the kind of dress that required posture, not just fabric. The door opened, and the air in the room shifted instantly. The temperature didn't drop, but the pressure increased. Declan walked in. He had traded his business suit for a tuxedo that fit him so perfectly, it was almost offensive. He stopped in the doorway, his dark eyes scanning the room before landing on Tess. He went completely still. For a long, silent moment, He just stared. His gaze started at her shoes, traveled up the curve of her hip, lingered on the exposed skin of her shoulders, and finally locked onto her eyes. His pupils dilated, swallowing the brown until his eyes looked like voids. "Well?" Tess asked, feeling heat creep up her neck. "Do I pass inspection, or do I look like a caterer playing dress-up?" Declan cleared his throat, the sound rough. He walked into the room, waving a hand at the stylist. "Leave us." "But sir, the hair!" Chloe started. "Leave us," Declan repeated. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made the stylists drop their brushes and scramble for the door. When they were alone, the silence stretched, thick and tension-filled. "You look," Declan started, then stopped. He seemed to struggle for a word that wasn't dangerous. "Adequate." Tess rolled her eyes, stepping down from the pedestal. "High praise. Thanks." "I have 2 things for you," Declan said, reaching into his tuxedo jacket. He pulled out a folded slip of paper and a small velvet box. He handed the paper to her first. Tess unfolded it. It was a check. A personal check, signed by Declan St. James, made out to her. The amount made her knees weak. It was enough to cover her rent for a year, plus the van repairs, plus, well, everything. "What is this?" she asked, her voice sharp. "An advance," Declan said dismissively. "For incidentals, wardrobe maintenance, cosmetics. I don't want you putting expenses on your personal cards." Tess stared at the numbers. It felt like a bribe. It felt like he was buying her compliance, not just her time. Her pride, which had already taken a beating when she signed the contract, flared up like a grease fire. She didn't tear it up. That would be dramatic and stupid. Instead, she folded it into a tiny, sharp square and shoved it deep into the pocket of her jeans, which were currently draped over a chair. "I don't need an allowance, Dad," she said, her tone biting. "I'll keep it for emergencies, but don't expect me to cash in." Declan's jaw tightened. "It's not charity, Tess. It's logistics." "Whatever. What's in the box?" He opened the velvet case. Inside sat a ring. It wasn't a diamond. It was a massive, cushion-cut sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds set in white gold. It was vintage, heavy, and undoubtedly worth more than her entire life. "Family heirloom," Declan said, his voice dropping. "My grandmother's. It sells the lie." He took the ring from the box. He reached for her left hand. Tess hesitated, then extended her fingers. As Declan slid the cool metal over her knuckle, the pad of his thumb brushed against the sensitive skin of her palm. Snap! A jolt of electricity, sharp, hot, and violent, zapped between them. Tess gasped, jerking her hand back. "Ouch! God, do you have a carpet static problem in here?" She rubbed her hand. The skin tingled where he had touched her, a strange, numbing buzz that traveled all the way up her arm to her heart. Declan hadn't moved. He was staring at her hand, his face pale. He looked like he'd been punched in the gut. "Static," he repeated, his voice strained. "Yes, the humidity is low." He knew. He absolutely knew. That wasn't static. That was the bond recognition. The hard rule of his biology screaming that he had just claimed his mate. "Well," Tess said, shaking her hand to get the feeling back. "Let's hope I don't electrocute anyone at the party. Let's go get this over with." Chapter 7. The Gala. The charity gala for the St. James Foundation was held in a ballroom that was larger than the city block where Tess grew up. Crystal chandeliers the size of compact cars hung from the ceiling, casting a golden glow over hundreds of people who all looked like they bathed in money. Camera flashes erupted like strobe lights the moment they stepped out of the limo. "Keep your head up," Declan murmured, his hand settling on the small of her back. Through the velvet of her dress, his touch felt like a brand. "Don't look at the cameras, look at me." Tess swallowed her nerves and looked up at him. "Easy for you to say. You're used to this. I feel like an imposter in a very expensive costume." "You're not an imposter," Declan said, guiding her up the red carpet. "Tonight, you are the future Mrs. St. James. Act like you own the building." They navigated the room, a shark moving with his pilot fish. Declan introduced her to board members, investors, and politicians. Tess played her part. She smiled until her face hurt. She laughed at jokes she didn't understand. She sipped champagne and prayed she wouldn't trip. Well, well, a voice sneered from behind them. I heard rumors, St. James. I didn't think you'd actually bring a civilian. Declan stiffened. The muscles in his arm turned to steel under her hand. They turned. Standing there was a man who looked like a polished vulture, slicked back blonde hair, a predatory smile, and eyes that held zero warmth. This was Marcus Thorne, a rival developer, and, unbeknownst to Tess, a rival alpha from the River Pack. Thorne. Declan acknowledged, his voice dropping to a low growl. I see they're letting anyone in tonight. I have a standing invite, Thorne said, dismissing Declan to look at Tess. His gaze felt slimy. And who is this? The little baker I read about? Tell me, sweetheart, how much is he paying you to pretend he's capable of human emotion? The insult hung in the air. People nearby went quiet. Declan took a step forward, his hands curling into fists, his eyes flashing a dangerous amber hue. Tess didn't wait for him to intervene. She stepped in front of Declan, blocking his path. He doesn't pay me anything, Tess said, her voice clear and carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. She gave Thorne a smile that was all teeth and zero humor. But I'd pay you to get a better tailor. That suit is bunching at the shoulders. It makes you look insecure. A ripple of shocked laughter went through the bystanders. Thorne's smile vanished. Excuse me. You heard me, Tess said, stepping closer, smelling like vanilla and pure audacity. And for the record, Declan doesn't need to pretend anything. He has more integrity in his little finger than you have in your entire offshore bank account. Now, if you'll excuse us, the appetizers are calling my name, and they're infinitely more interesting than you. She grabbed Declan's hand and pulled him away. Declan followed her, stunned. He let her drag him toward the balcony doors, away from the prying eyes. When they were outside in the cool night air, he stopped her. He spun her around, pinning her against a stone railing. The city lights twinkled behind him, but all he saw was her. You, he breathed, are terrifying. He was a jerk, Tess said, her heart racing. I hate bullies. He's a dangerous man, Tess. He's a guy in a bad suit, she countered. I've handled worse. You should see the bridezilla I dealt with last week. Declan stared at her. The admiration in his eyes was naked, raw. He looked at her mouth. For a second, just a second, the fake engagement felt incredibly, dangerously real. Thank you, he said softly. Don't thank me, Tess whispered, breathless. Just get me a slider. I'm starving. Chapter 8. The Departure. The morning after the gala, the internet was ablaze. The picture of Tess telling off Marcus Thorne, finger pointed, eyes blazing, was trending. The caption read, The baker bites back. St. James' fiancé is fierce. Declan was pleased. The board was ecstatic. The fake relationship was selling better than they had hoped. Phase 2, Declan announced, throwing a duffel bag into the trunk of a massive, armored black Range Rover parked in the penthouse garage. The romantic getaway. Do we have to? Tess groaned, wrestling Gus into the back seat. The basset hound was dead weight, refusing to jump. I have orders to prep. My assistants are handling your cancellations, Declan said, closing the trunk. We need content. A weekend at my private lodge. Cozy fires, snowy walks. We take a few photos, post them, and secure the narrative. Iron Creek Lodge, Tess read from the itinerary on her phone. Sounds rustic. Does it have Wi-Fi? It has satellite, Declan said, opening the passenger door for her. Spotty at best. We'll be off the grid. Great, Tess muttered, climbing in. Just me, you, and the silence. We'll probably kill each other by noon. I have excellent self-control, Declan said, sliding into the driver's seat. He started the engine. It purred with a low, powerful rumble. We'll see about that, Tess said. Gus snores, like vibrating the walls snores. I'll survive, Declan said, putting the car in gear. The drive out of the city took 3 hours. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the gray slush of the urban streets gave way to pristine, white snow. The trees grew taller, denser. The air outside the car looked biting cold. Inside the car, the tension was thick. They hadn't touched since the static incident with the ring, but the small space made avoiding each other impossible. Every time Declan shifted gears, his arm brushed hers. Every time he checked the side mirror, his scent, that cedar and winter air smell, filled the cabin. Tess found herself staring at his hands on the steering wheel. Large, capable hands. She quickly looked out the window, scolding herself. He is the client. He is the boss. He is fake. Storm rolling in, Declan murmured, looking at the sky. Thick, dark gray clouds were swallowing the peaks ahead. The wind was picking up, whipping snow across the windshield. Is the lodge accessible in a blizzard? Tess asked, a prickle of anxiety hitting her. The rover can handle it, Declan said confidently. We'll be there in 20 minutes. He was wrong. Chapter 9. The Blizzard. They made it to the lodge, but barely. Iron Creek Lodge was a stunning structure of timber and stone, nestled deep in the pines. But by the time Declan killed the engine, the world outside was a white void. The wind was howling like a banshee, shaking the heavy frame of the car. Stay close, Declan shouted over the wind as they opened the doors. The cold hit Tess like a physical slap. It stole the breath from her lungs. She grabbed Gus, who was shivering violently, and bolted for the front door. Declan followed with the bags, moving easily through the knee-deep drifts. He unlocked the door, and they tumbled inside, shaking off snow. The interior was beautiful. Vaulted ceilings, a massive stone fireplace, leather furniture, but it was freezing. Why is it so cold? Tess asked, her teeth chattering. Don't you have a smart home system? Declan frowned. He walked to a control panel on the wall. He tapped it. The screen remained dark. Power outage, he said grimly. The storm must have taken down a line. So, no heat? The generator should have kicked in, Declan muttered, frustration leaking into his voice. I need to check the breaker box in the shed. You're not going back out there, Tess exclaimed, pointing to the window. It was a whiteout. You couldn't see 3 feet past the glass. You'll get lost. Declan looked at the storm, then at her. He knew he could survive it, his wolf could handle the cold, but he couldn't explain that to her. Fine, he conceded. We wait it out. The lodge is well insulated. We have the fireplace. Okay, Tess said, rubbing her arms. Where are the bedrooms? Upstairs, Declan said. 5 suites. They walked up the grand staircase. Declan tried the door to the first guest room. Locked. He tried the second. Locked. He paused. I haven't been here in a year. The housekeeping staff must have locked the guest wings to preserve dust covers. Do you have the key? Digital keys, Declan said, tapping the dead keypad on the wall. The system is fried from the surge. They won't open without power. Tess stared at him. Please tell me you have a way into the master suite. Physical override, Declan said, pulling a real metal key from his pocket. Old habits die hard. He unlocked the double doors at the end of the hall and pushed them open. The room was massive, dominated by a roaring fireplace, which he must have lit earlier, and a bed. A single bed. A king-size bed, sure, but still, one bed. You have got to be kidding me, Tess deadpanned. This is a romance novel cliché. I refuse to participate. It's the only room with a working fireplace, Declan pointed out, already kneeling to arrange logs in the grate. And it's going to get to 20 below zero tonight. You can sleep in the hall if you want, but Gus looks cold. Tess looked down at Gus, who was looking up at her with tragic, watery eyes. Fine, she groaned, but we build a wall. A pillow wall, the great wall of pillow. Declan struck a match, the fire roaring to life. The orange glow illuminated his sharp features. He looked up at her, and for a moment the predator surfaced. Whatever makes you feel safe, Tess. Chapter 10. The Blackout. 2 hours later, the sun had set, plunging the lodge into total darkness save for the firelight. The silence was absolute. No hum of the fridge, no whir of the heater. Just the crackle of wood and the howling wind outside. I'm starving, Tess announced from the rug where she was sitting with Gus. The electric stove won't work, Declan said from the armchair. He was reading a book by firelight, or pretending to. In reality, he was listening to her heartbeat. It was steady, soothing. It was driving his wolf crazy. I'm a chef, Tess scoffed. I don't need electricity, I need fire. She got up, grabbed a flashlight, and rummaged through the pantry. She came back 5 minutes later, balancing a loaded tray, a cast-iron skillet, a bag of gourmet sausages, onions, a block of cheese, and a paring knife. You're going to cook in the bedroom? Declan asked, raising an eyebrow as she set the tray on the hearth. It's a fireplace. It's basically an indoor campfire. Tess set the skillet on the grate. Besides, what's the point of being stranded if you don't eat comfort food? Within minutes, the smell of sizzling sausage and caramelizing onions filled the room, overpowering the cedar scent of the logs. It smelled rich, greasy, and amazing. Declan's stomach growled. Loudly. Tess looked back at him, grinning. Hungry, Mr. Billionaire? I thought you only ate raw almonds and sadness. I have a strict diet, Declan defended, though he was already putting his book down. Not tonight, Tess said. She plated the food onto 2 china plates she'd brought up. She handed him one. Tonight, calories don't count. It's a survival rule. Declan took the plate. He took a bite. The flavor exploded in his mouth, savory, hot, fatty. It was the best thing he had tasted in years. He ate with a speed that surprised even him. When he finished, he looked up to find Tess watching him, her expression soft. See? She said quietly. Real food beats kale every time. It's acceptable. Declan lied, wiping his mouth. You licked the fork, Tess teased. I did not. You totally did. She laughed, a warm, genuine sound that seemed to push back the cold. Declan felt a crack in his chest, a barrier lowering. He set his plate down and leaned forward, the firelight dancing in his eyes. So, he said, his voice low, since we have no internet and no way out, tell me, Tess Bennett, why do you have a burn scar on your arm? Tess touched the faint mark on her forearm self-consciously. The mood in the room shifted. The banter faded, replaced by something heavier. Intimacy. Trade you, she said, her eyes meeting his. I tell you about the scar. You tell me why you hate this house. Declan froze. She was observant, too observant. Deal, he said. Chapter 11. The Gambit. The silence in the lodge was heavy, weighted down by the snow piling up against the windows. The fire was the only living thing in the room, casting long, dancing shadows against the log walls. Gus had long since passed out on the rug, twitching in his sleep as he chased dream rabbits. Tess sat cross-legged on the floor, picking at a loose thread on her sweater. So, she said, her voice cutting through the quiet. We've eaten, we've survived the frostbite. Now what? Do we stare at each other until one of us blinks? Declan looked up from the fire. The flames reflected in his dark eyes, making them look molten. He stood up, his movement unfolding with a predatory grace that always made Tess feel like she should check for exits. I have something, he said. He walked to a heavy oak cabinet in the corner of the room. He pulled out a box made of dark, polished wood and set it on the low coffee table between them. Chess? Tess asked, raising an eyebrow. How very Queen's Gambit of you. Let me guess, you were a prodigy at age 4. My grandfather taught me, Declan said, opening the box. The pieces weren't the standard plastic junk. They were hand-carved marble, white and gray, heavy and cool to the touch. It teaches strategy, patience, sacrifice. I learned on an iPad app while waiting for dough to rise, Tess countered, moving to sit opposite him. I usually play aggressive. I'm sure you do, Declan murmured. He began setting up the board. His large hands moved the delicate pieces with surprising tenderness. Let's make it interesting. Tess narrowed her eyes. I'm not betting money, St. James. I've seen your car. You could buy my life with the change in your cup holder. Not money, Declan said, placing the king. Truths. Truths? For every game won, the winner gets to ask a question. The loser must answer honestly. No deflections, no sarcasm. Tess hesitated. It sounded dangerous. Declan was a locked vault of secrets, and she was just a caterer with a messy life. But the curiosity was itching under her skin. She wanted to know who he really was beneath the expensive suits and the growly attitude. Fine, she said, moving her pawn forward 2 spaces. But if I win, you can't fire me. If you win, Declan said, moving his knight, I'll be impressed. They played in silence for the first 10 moves. Tess wasn't lying. She played with a chaotic, reckless energy, sacrificing pawns to open up lanes. Declan played like a fortress, defensive, calculated, unshakable. But Tess saw an opening. He was protecting his king too heavily, leaving his bishop exposed. She slid her queen across the marble surface, lining up the kill shot. Gotcha, she grinned. One more move and you're done. Declan paused. He looked at the board, then at her. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, transforming him from intimidating CEO to something devastatingly handsome. You were so focused on the attack, he pointed out, lifting his hand. You left your flank open. He moved his rook, bypassing her trap entirely. Checkmate. Tess stared at the board. You baited me. I told you, Declan said, leaning back, the firelight catching the sharp line of his jaw. Strategy, now pay up. Chapter 12, The Scars We Keep. Tess groaned, falling back onto the rug. Fine, ask your question, you manipulative shark. Declan didn't answer immediately. He watched her, his gaze feeling physical, like a touch. The air in the room felt thicker, warmer. The scar, he said softly. On your arm. You said you'd tell me. Tess sat up, instinctively covering the pale, jagged mark on her forearm. It wasn't ugly, but it was a memory she didn't often visit. It's not a cool story, she warned. I didn't fight a bear or save a baby from a burning building. Tell me, he commanded. It wasn't harsh, it was an invitation. I was 19, Tess began, tracing the line of the burn. Culinary school. I was working 3 jobs to pay tuition. I was exhausted. I fell asleep standing up while pulling a sheet pan of sugar glass out of the oven. 400 degrees of molten sugar. Declan hissed a breath through his teeth. That creates a 3rd-degree burn instantly. Yep, Tess nodded. They told me to quit, said I didn't have the stamina, said I was too clumsy. She looked at him, lifting her chin defiantly. I was back in the kitchen 2 days later with my arm wrapped in gauze. I finished the semester top of my class. Declan stared at her. His expression was intense, a mixture of respect and something darker, more possessive. You don't know when to quit, he stated. Quitting is for people with trust funds. Tess shot back, then flinched. Sorry, no offense. None taken, Declan said. I admire resilience. It's rare. Reset the board, Tess challenged, her competitive streak flaring. I want a rematch, and I have questions for you. They played again. This time, Tess didn't take the bait. She played slower, watching his eyes instead of his hands. She noticed a twitch in his brow when she threatened his knights. He was protective of his soldiers. 20 minutes later, Tess trapped his king in a corner using a pawn and a bishop. Checkmate, she whispered. Declan looked at the board, stunned. You learn fast. I adapt, Tess corrected. My turn, the question. She took a breath. Your family. You never talk about them. You have this massive empire, this legacy, but you're always alone. Why? Declan stiffened. The atmosphere in the room grew cold despite the fire. My family, he said, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. He couldn't tell her about the pack politics, the challengers he had killed, the father who had tried to break him to make him stronger. They believe in power, only power. To them, affection is a weakness, a liability. That's sad. Tess said simply, it's necessary. Declan corrected, his voice hard. In my world, if you show a soft underbelly, you get gutted. I learned early on to be stone. To be alone is to be safe. That's a lonely way to live, Tess murmured. Even stones crack in the cold, Declan. He looked at her, and for a moment, the amber light in his eyes flared so bright, she thought it was a trick of the fire. Yes, he rasped. I am beginning to realize that. Chapter 13. The Fever. The 3rd game was a bloodbath. Neither was playing for fun anymore. They were playing for the secrets they were too afraid to ask out loud. The room was getting hotter. Tess pulled at the collar of her sweater. Is it just me, she asked, fanning herself, or is the fire getting aggressive? Declan didn't look up from the board, but she saw a bead of sweat track down his temple. He had taken off his jacket earlier, and the white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the hollow of his throat. "The insulation is efficient," he muttered. It wasn't the insulation, it was the heat, the proximity. Being snowed in with his mate, sharing truths, smelling her arousal and her vanilla scent, it was pushing his biology into the red zone. His wolf was pacing, demanding he close the distance. "Check," Declan said, his voice strained. "Nope," Tess countered, moving her knight. "Blocked." She looked at him. He looked feverish. His skin was flushed, his eyes glassy. "Are you okay?" she asked, concern replacing her competitiveness. "You look like you're coming down with something." "I'm fine," he growled. "Make your move." "You're burning up," Tess said. She reached out, placing the back of her hand against his forehead. The contact was electric. Declan flinched as if she'd branded him. He grabbed her wrist, stopping her. His grip was strong, his skin scorching hot against hers. "Don't," he warned, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in her bones. "You have a fever," Tess insisted, trying to pull away, but he held on. "Declan, let go. You're hurting me." He released her instantly, pulling his hand back as if he'd been burned. He stood up, pacing away from the fire, towards the dark window. He was breathing hard. "It's not a fever," he said tightly. "It's adrenaline." "From chess?" Tess asked incredulously. "Okay, Bobby Fischer, relax. We can stop playing." "We should sleep," Declan said, his back to her. He couldn't look at her. If he looked at her, he would claim her, and he couldn't do that. Not here. Not when she didn't know what he was. "One more question," Tess said to his back. "I won that last round before you quit." Declan sighed, leaning his forehead against the cold glass. "Ask." "Why are you single? And don't give me the too busy line. You're intense, you're successful, and you look like, well, you. You could have anyone." Declan closed his eyes. "I'm waiting for you," he thought. "I've been waiting for you since I took my first breath." "I'm waiting for an equal," he said aloud. "Someone who doesn't look at the bank account, but looks at the man. Someone who isn't afraid to tell me my pizza order is wrong." Tess went silent. The only sound was the crackling fire. "Well," she said softly, "I hope you find her." The irony was a knife in his gut. Chapter 14. The Long Night. By 2 a.m., the fire had died down to embers. The cold had returned with a vengeance. It crept through the floorboards, seeping into the marrow of their bones. Tess was curled up under the duvet on the massive bed, wearing her sweater, leggings, and 2 pairs of socks, but she was still shivering. Gus was buried somewhere under the pillows, a lump of snoring fur. Declan was sitting in the armchair, wrapped in a blanket, watching the dying light. He refused to come to the bed. "Declan," Tess's voice chattered from the dark. "Don't be a martyr. You're going to freeze." "I run hot," he said. It was true. His werewolf metabolism was a furnace, fighting the cold. "I don't," Tess said, her teeth clicking. "And I can hear your teeth chattering from here. You're a terrible liar." He wasn't shivering from cold. He was shivering from restraint, but he couldn't explain that. "Come here," Tess commanded. "It's a king-size bed. We can stay on opposite sides. Put a pillow barrier. Just get under the covers." Declan hesitated. His wolf whined. "Pack sleeps together. Mate needs warmth." "Fine," he grunted. He walked to the bed. He shed his shoes and climbed in, keeping a strict distance. He lay on his back, stiff as a board, staring at the ceiling. Minutes passed. The cold was relentless. "This is stupid," Tess muttered. She scooted over. "Tess," Declan warned. "Shut up," she said. "Hypothermia is not a romantic plot point." She pressed her back against his side. The contact was explosive. For Declan, it was like touching a live wire. But for Tess, he was a radiator. He was impossibly, miraculously warm. "God, you're like a furnace," she sighed, snuggling closer, seeking the heat. She draped an arm over his chest, her head resting on his shoulder. Declan stopped breathing. He could smell the lavender shampoo in her hair. He could feel the soft curve of her breast against his arm. Her leg tangled with his. The static hummed between them, a low, constant buzz that wasn't painful anymore, but addictive. Just for warmth, Tess mumbled, her voice already heavy with sleep. Strictly thermal exchange. Strictly thermal, Declan repeated, his voice strained. He turned slightly, just enough to wrap his arm around her waist. It was meant to secure her, to keep her warm, but the moment his hand settled on her hip, he felt a sense of rightness that terrified him. She fit. She fit perfectly against the jagged edges of his soul. He lay there in the dark, the wind howling outside, holding the woman who could destroy his carefully constructed world with a single smile. And for the first time in his life, he didn't want to let go. Chapter 15. The Return. Tess woke up to sunlight blinding her. She blinked, disoriented. The storm had passed. The window showed a world of brilliant, blinding white snow under a clear blue sky. She realized three things simultaneously. 1. The power was back on. The digital clock on the nightstand was blinking 8 a.m. 2. She was incredibly warm. 3. She was practically draped on top of Declan St. James. Her leg was thrown over his thigh. Her face was buried in the crook of his neck. His arm was wrapped tight around her waist, holding her flushed against his chest. She froze. He smelled like sleep and cedar. His heartbeat was slow, steady, thumping against her ear. She slowly, carefully tried to extract herself. She lifted her head. Declan's eyes opened. They weren't groggy. They were instantly alert, sharp, and focused on her. Going somewhere? He rasped, his morning voice a rumble of thunder. Tess stammered, scrambling back. Sun's up. Power's on. We survived. Declan let her go, though his hand lingered on her waist for a fraction of a second too long. He sat up, running a hand through his messy hair. The domesticity of it, the rumpled sheets, the bedhead, hit Tess like a punch. We need to go, Declan said, his tone shifting abruptly back to business. The roads will be plowed by now. I have a meeting at noon. The walls were back up. The vulnerability of the chessboard and the shared warmth of the night were gone, locked away behind the CEO mask. Tess felt a pang of disappointment. Right. The merger. The contract. They packed in silence. The drive back to the city was different than the drive up. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was heavy with things left unsaid. When the skyline of the city came into view, gray and imposing, Tess felt a sense of dread. Back to reality, she murmured, looking out the window. Declan gripped the steering wheel tight. Phase 3 begins now, he said. The public eye. It's going to get intense, Tess. Are you ready? I survived a blizzard with you, Tess said, forcing a smile. How bad can a few paparazzi be? Declan didn't answer. He knew what was coming. He knew Marcus Thorne wasn't done. He knew his own pack was restless. And he knew that pretending to be in love with Tess was about to become the hardest thing he'd ever done. Because he wasn't pretending anymore. As they pulled up to the penthouse, a swarm of photographers was already waiting at the curb. Showtime, Declan said, putting on his sunglasses. He opened the door and the flashbulbs erupted. Chapter 16. Withdrawal Symptoms. The city was loud. That was the first thing Tess noticed upon returning to her tiny apartment above the Savory Crumb. At the lodge, the silence had been heavy and comforting, wrapped in snow and cedar. Here, sirens wailed, trucks rumbled, and her neighbor upstairs was apparently learning a tap dance in lead boots. Tess sat on her lumpy sofa, Gus's heavy head resting on her knee. The penthouse luxury was a memory. The lodge's firelight was a dream. Reality was a stack of unpaid invoices on the coffee table and a radiator that hissed like an angry cat. We're fine, she told the dog. Gus looked skeptical, his droopy eyes accusing her of lying. It was just a weekend, Gus, a business trip. The billionaire is back in his tower, and we are back in the trenches. But her body didn't feel fine. She felt hollow. It was a physical sensation, like she was missing a limb. Her skin felt too sensitive, itching with the phantom energy she couldn't scratch. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart slammed against her ribs, hoping it was him. It was never him. It was just bill collectors or spam risks. Across the city, in the gleaming glass spire of St. James Holdings, Declan was not faring any better. This report is garbage, he growled, tossing a glossy folder across the mahogany conference table. The junior executive flinched. "Sir, the projections are optimistic fiction." Declan snapped. He stood up, pacing the length of the room. The air conditioning was set to Arctic, but he was burning up. His wolf was agitated. It paced inside his chest, scratching at the walls of his control. It wanted its mate. It wanted to know why they were separated. It wanted to hunt down whatever was keeping them apart and destroy it. Declan loosened his tie. The scent of the office, ozone, dry cleaning, fear, was nauseating. He needed her scent, that specific biological cocktail of yeast, lemon zest, and rain that settled his nerves like a sedative. "Sir," his assistant, an older woman named Martha who terrified everyone but him, poked her head in. "You have a lunch meeting with the Nordic group." "Cancel it," Declan said, grabbing his jacket. "Sir, that merger is the reason you're currently engaged," Martha reminded him dryly. "Move it to tomorrow," Declan corrected, heading for the door. "I need to inspect an asset." "Which asset?" "The bakery," Declan said, the elevator doors sliding open. He told himself it was business. He had invested, or promised to invest, in her company. He needed to ensure she wasn't burning the place down. But as the elevator plummeted toward the ground floor, Declan knew he was lying. He wasn't checking an asset. He was chasing a fix. The separation anxiety was a physical ache, a gnawing hunger that no amount of money could satiate. He needed to see her, now. Chapter 17. The Inspection. The Savory Crumb was chaos in motion. It was a small shop, nestled between a laundromat and a bodega. The front was quaint, pastel colors, handwritten chalkboard menus, but the back was a war zone. Tess was currently wrestling with a 50-pound bag of flour that had decided to fight back. Her apron was dusted white, her hair was escaping its chopstick prison, and she was sweating. "Pivot!" She grunted to her sous chef, a teenager named Leo, who was more enthusiastic than skilled. "Leo, watch the mixer! It walks!" The industrial mixer in the corner was indeed walking, vibrating across the counter like a sentient robot trying to escape. The bell above the front door chimed. "We're closed for prep!" Tess shouted over the roar of the machinery. "Come back at 2!" "I don't wait for opening hours." The voice cut through the noise like a hot knife. The mixer seemed to rattle quieter in deference. Tess spun around. Declan stood in the doorway, between the front of the house and the kitchen. He looked absurdly out of place. His Italian suit cost more than the entire building. His polished shoes were dangerously close to a puddle of spilled milk. "Declan," Tess breathed. The relief that washed over her was instant and terrifying. The itching under her skin stopped. The hollow feeling in her chest filled up. "What are you doing here?" "Inspecting my investment," Declan said, stepping into the kitchen. He wrinkled his nose, his dark eyes scanning the cramped space. "This ventilation is inadequate, and that oven seal is leaking heat." "It adds character," Tess said, wiping her floury hands on her apron. She tried to look professional, but her heart was doing backflips. "And we're not technically your investment yet. You haven't written the check for the renovation." "I'm writing it today," Declan said. He walked toward her, ignoring Leo, who was staring at him with open-mouthed awe. Declan stopped inches from her. He took a deep breath, inhaling the air around her. To anyone else, it looked like he was inspecting her hygiene. To Tess, it felt like being devoured. "You have flour on your nose," he murmured. He reached out. His thumb brushed the tip of her nose. Zap! The static was sharper this time. It felt like a rubber band snap against her skin. Tess jumped back, rubbing her nose. "Seriously, you need to change your shoes. You're a walking conductor." Declan's hand lingered in the air, his fingers twitching. His eyes were dark, the pupils blown wide. "It's the dry air." He lied smoothly. "I'm sending a contractor tomorrow. This place is a hazard." "I don't need a handler, Declan." Tess argued, though her voice lacked heat. "I need a new mixer. That one is possessed." "You'll get both," Declan said. "I'm taking you to lunch." "I can't. I have 300 tarts to prep. Leo can't do that alone. He'll burn the kitchen down." "I know," Declan said calmly. He pulled out his phone and spoke into it. "Send Marco from the hotel pastry team to the bakery. Now." He hung up and looked at Tess. "My head pastry chef will be here in 5 minutes to help Leo. Your tarts will be Michelin standard." Tess stared at him, her mouth slightly open. You just summoned a chef? I solve problems, Tess. Get your coat. We have to discuss strategy. The press is asking questions. It was an excuse, they both knew it, but Tess untied her apron without another word. Chapter 18, The Predator. They didn't go to a restaurant. Declan had his driver bring takeout from a Michelin-star bistro to the park across the street. It was a public place, good for being seen, good for the narrative. They sat on a bench, a spread of gourmet sandwiches between them. The wind was biting, but Declan sat close enough that his body heat acted as a shield. So, Tess said, chewing on a truffle-infused grilled cheese. What's the strategy? Do I need to fight another billionaire? Because I'm ready.
No fighting today,
Declan said, watching her eat with an intensity that made her blush.
just visibility. We need to be seen existing, happy, normal.
Normal. Tess laughed. Right, because you eating a sandwich on a park bench is normal. You look like you're waiting for a helicopter extraction. Before Declan could retort, a shadow fell over them. Declan! I didn't realize you frequented public parks. Tess looked up. Standing there was a woman who looked like she had been carved from ice and diamonds. She was tall, willow-thin, with platinum blonde hair cut in a sharp bob and eyes that were a piercing, unnatural shade of pale blue. She wore a white coat that somehow repelled the city grime. Sloane, Declan said. His voice dropped to absolute zero. He didn't stand up. It's been a while, the woman, Sloane, said. Her gaze slid to Tess. It wasn't a friendly look. It was a biological assessment. She sniffed the air, her nose wrinkling slightly. And this must be the fiancé. Tess Bennett, Tess said, wiping her hand on a napkin before extending it. Nice to meet you. Sloane didn't take her hand. She just stared at it. Civilian, she said, the word sounding like an insult. How quaint. Tess pulled her hand back, her eyes narrowing. I'm sorry, is civilian a condition I should be worried about? I run a business, lady. Sloane smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Oh, no, dear, it's just fragile, short-lived. She looked back at Declan. The River Group sends their regards, Declan. We were surprised you chose to partner outside the legacy families. It weakens the alliance. Tess frowned. Legacy families? Is this some weird skull and bones society talk? Declan stood up then. He moved between Tess and Sloane, blocking the woman's view. His posture was aggressive, his shoulders squared. Tess is not a topic for discussion, Sloane, he growled. And the alliance is fine. My personal life does not concern the River Group. Doesn't it? Sloane stepped closer, lowering her voice. You need strength, Declan. You need a partner who can run with you, not one you have to carry. She leaned around him to look at Tess one last time. Don't break, little Baker. His world is heavy. With that, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the pavement like gunshots. Tess stared after her. Okay, she said slowly. She was intense. Ex-girlfriend? Business rival, Declan said tightly, sitting back down. His hands were clenched into fists. Ignore her. She said I was fragile, Tess muttered, looking at her hand. I lift 50-pound flour bags for fun. I'd like to see her try. Declan looked at her. The anger in his eyes melted into something softer. He reached out and took her hand, the one Sloane had refused to shake. You're not fragile, Tess, he said fiercely. You're the strongest thing I know. Chapter 19. The Fever Breaks. The next morning, the fragility comment came back to haunt her. Tess woke up feeling like she had been run over by a steamroller. Her head pounded, her throat felt like she had swallowed glass, and her limbs were made of lead. No, she groaned, burying her face in the pillow. Not now. I have a wedding cake due on Friday. She tried to sit up. The room spun. She collapsed back down. She grabbed her phone. 5 missed texts from Declan. 8 a.m. Contractor is arriving at 9. 9:15 a.m. Contractor says you aren't there. Where are you? 10 a.m. Tess. 10:30 a.m. Answer me. 11 a.m. I'm coming over. Tess groaned. She started to type, I'm fine, just sick, but her fingers were clumsy. She dropped the phone. It clattered to the floor, just out of reach. Gus, she rasped. Fetch. Gus, asleep at the foot of the bed, opened one eye and sighed. He did not fetch. 20 minutes later, there was a pounding on her apartment door. Not a knock, a pounding that shook the frame. Tess, open up! She tried to yell, "It's unlocked," but it came out as a squeak. The door burst open, the lock splintered. Declan stormed in, looking ready for war. He scanned the room, spotted her lump form under the duvet, and was at her side in a second. Tess! The rage vanished, replaced by panic. He touched her forehead. You're burning up. Flu, Tess whispered, dying. Tell my mother I love her. Tell Leo to not overmix the batter. You're not dying, Declan said, his voice grim. You have a fever. He scooped her up, duvet and all. Put me down, she protested weakly. I'm gross. I haven't brushed my teeth. I don't care, Declan said. He carried her to the bathroom, sat her on the closed toilet lid, and started running a bath. We need to lower your temperature. You broke my door, Tess mumbled, leaning her head against his stomach as he stood in front of her. He felt solid, warm. I'll buy you a better door, he murmured, stroking her hair. Steel reinforced. For the next 6 hours, the CEO of St. James Holdings became a nurse, a very bossy, very overqualified nurse. He forced her to drink water. He made her soup, which he ordered from a restaurant because he would burn water. He sat by her bed, changing the cool cloth on her forehead every 10 minutes. In her feverish haze, Tess watched him. He had discarded his jacket and tie. His sleeves were rolled up. He looked tired. Why are you here? She asked softly in the dim light of the evening. Don't you have a merger? The merger can wait, Declan said, sitting in the chair beside her bed. He took her hand. This time, the static was dull, muted by her illness. You're the priority. Why? Because, Declan said, looking at her knuckles. I protect what's mine. I'm not yours, Tess whispered, eyes closing. It's a fake contract. Right, Declan said to the sleeping woman. Fake. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it, lingering over the pulse point. Sleep, Tess. Chapter 20. The Kitchen Confidential. By Friday, Tess was back on her feet. She was still a little pale, but the fever had broken. It was 11 p.m. The bakery was closed, the lights dimmed. Tess was in the kitchen, finishing the fondant roses for the wedding cake. She liked the quiet of the night shift. The back door opened. She didn't jump. She knew the cadence of those footsteps now. Heavy, confident. You should be resting, Declan said, walking into the pool of light cast by the overhead lamp. Cake waits for no man, Tess said, not looking up from her work. And I feel fine, thanks to your aggressive hydration therapy. Declan leaned against the stainless steel counter. He watched her hands work the delicate sugar paste. You scared me, he admitted quietly. Tess paused. She looked up. It was just the flu, Declan. Humans get it. We're fragile, remember? Don't say that word, he growled. He pushed off the counter and walked around to her side of the island. You scared me because I couldn't fix it. I can buy doors. I can buy mixers. I couldn't buy your fever away. He was standing too close. The air in the kitchen shifted. It became charged, heavy with the scent of sugar and rain and cedar. You did good, Tess whispered. You stayed. I'll always stay, Declan said. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek. His thumb traced her lower lip. Tess's breath hitched. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't fake. This wasn't for the cameras. There was no one here but the hum of the refrigerator. Declan, she breathed. Tess, he murmured. His eyes dropped to her mouth. They flashed amber, bright, burning gold. Tess saw it. She blinked, thinking it was a trick of the light. He leaned in. He was going to kiss her. Really kiss her. And she was going to let him. She wanted him to. She leaned up, her hands resting on his chest, feeling the thudding of his heart. Crash. A metal mixing bowl clattered to the floor with the sound of a bomb going off. They jumped apart. Gus stood in the doorway, tail wagging slowly. He had knocked over a stack of bowls on the lower shelf with his massive behind. He looked at them, then at the bowls, then let out a loud, demanding bark. The moment shattered, Declan let out a long, ragged breath. He ran a hand over his face. "I'm going to trade that dog for a goldfish." Tess laughed, though it sounded breathless and shaky. "He has impeccable timing." "Go home, Declan," she said, turning back to the roses so he wouldn't see her flushed face. "Before we do something that isn't in the contract." Declan stood there for a moment longer. The air was still vibrating. "To hell with the contract," he muttered. But he turned and walked out the door, leaving Tess alone with the sugar roses and a heart that was beating far too fast. Chapter 21. The Final Course. The private dining room on the top floor of the St. James Tower was a glass box floating above the city. The view was spectacular, a sprawling grid of golden lights, but Tess couldn't appreciate it. She felt like she was attending her own funeral. "To the partnership," Lars, the CEO of the Nordic group, boomed, raising his crystal champagne flute. "I admit, Declan, I didn't think you could pull this off so quickly, but seeing the chemistry between you two convinced us to waive the 3-month probation period entirely. Why wait when the synergy is this good?" Tess forced a smile that felt tight enough to snap. The probation was gone. The deal was done. She raised her glass. Cheers. Beside her, Declan was a statue carved from tension. He looked impeccable in his charcoal suit, but he hadn't touched his food. His hand rested on the table, dangerously close to hers, radiating that familiar, maddening heat. The dinner was the finish line. The papers had been signed an hour ago. The merger was official. St. James Holdings was now a global juggernaut, which meant the contract was fulfilled. Tess took a sip of champagne, the bubbles tasting like acid. In 3 days, they would announce an amicable separation due to conflicting schedules. She would go back to her bakery with her new equipment and her paid-off debts. He would go back to being the lonely king of his glass castle. It was exactly what she had signed up for. So why did she feel like she was suffocating?
You're quiet.
Declan murmured, leaning in close. His breath ghosted over her ear, sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Just planning my exit strategy," Tess lied, keeping her eyes on the centerpiece of white orchids. "I'm thinking of releasing a statement saying I left you for a man who eats carbs." Declan didn't laugh. His hand moved, covering hers on the tablecloth. His grip was tight, almost desperate. "Tess," he said, his voice low and rough. "We need to talk. After this." "There's nothing to talk about, Declan. The deal is done. You got your merger, I got my mixer." She tried to pull her hand away, but he held fast. "The deal," he snarled softly, the word dripping with disdain, "was a mistake." Lars cleared his throat from across the table.
Everything all right, Declan? You look like you want to kill someone.
Declan snapped his head up, his eyes flashing with a terrifying intensity.
"Just eager to get my fiancé home, Lars. It's been a long night."
The insinuation was clear. The men at the table chuckled. Tess flushed, heat creeping up her neck.
"Then go." Lars waved a hand. "The ink is dry. Go celebrate."
Declan stood up abruptly, pulling Tess with him. He didn't wait for goodbyes. He practically marched her out of the room, his hand pressed firmly against the small of her back. He wasn't guiding her. He was claiming her. They walked down the silent corridor, toward the private elevator. The air between them was crackling, volatile. It felt like walking through a thunderstorm seconds before the lightning strikes.
"Slow down,"
Tess said, struggling to keep up in her heels.
"What is wrong with you tonight?"
Declan didn't answer. He hit the call button for the elevator with enough force to crack the panel. The doors slid open. He ushered her inside and slammed his hand on the button for the penthouse. The doors closed, sealing them in a glass cage. Chapter 22. Going down to go up. The silence in the elevator was deafening. The only sound was the hum of the lift rising and the ragged sound of Declan's breathing. Tess looked at him. He was staring at the steel doors, his jaw clenched so hard, a muscle feathered in his cheek. He looked like a man holding back an explosion. "Declan," she said softly, "you're scaring me." He turned to her slowly. His eyes were dark, dilated, consuming. He looked at her like a starving man looks at a feast.
"I'm done pretending,"
he rasped. "Pretending what?" Tess asked, backing up until her shoulder blades hit the cool glass wall. "That we like each other?" The contract is over, Declan. You don't have to. I'm not pretending to like you, he interrupted, stalking toward her. I'm pretending I don't want to tear that dress off you with my teeth. Tess's breath hitched. Oh. He closed the distance. He didn't touch her, not yet. He planted a hand on the glass on either side of her head, caging her in. He smelled of expensive scotch, cedar, and that sharp, ozone scent of a storm. The contract is void, he growled. I don't want a fake fiancé, Tess. I want you. I'm messy, she stammered, her brain short-circuiting. I argue. I have a dog that smells like corn chips. I don't care, Declan said. I want the arguments. I want the dog. I want the flower on your nose. He leaned down, his nose brushing against hers. Tell me to stop, he whispered, his voice vibrating against her lips. Tell me to stop, and I will walk out of this elevator and never touch you again. Tess looked into his eyes. She saw the loneliness she had sensed in the chess game. She saw the fire she had felt at the lodge. Don't you dare stop, she breathed. The restraint snapped. Declan crushed his mouth to hers. It wasn't a movie kiss. It was a collision. It was hungry, messy, and desperate. He tasted of champagne and power. His hands tangled in her hair, tilting her head back to deepen the kiss. Tess wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer. The moment their bodies pressed together, chest to chest, hip to hip, the world went white. Snap. The static was no longer a spark. It was a lightning bolt. It tore through Tess, searing her nerves, making her gasp into his mouth. It felt like her blood was carbonated, bubbling with heat. Mine, Declan growled against her lips. It wasn't a word, it was a decree. The elevator chimed, signaling their arrival at the penthouse, but neither of them moved. The door slid open, revealing the dark living room, but Declan didn't stop kissing her. He lifted her effortlessly, her legs wrapping around his waist, and carried her into the darkness. Chapter 23, The Beast Beneath. Declan moved with a speed that shouldn't have been possible. One second they were in the elevator, the next he was pressing her against the wall of the foyer, his hands roaming over her body as if memorizing her shape. Declan! Tess gasped, breaking the kiss to catch her breath. Wait, the lights. No lights, he gritted out. I can't let you see. See what? Tess asked, breathless. She reached up to cup his face in the dim light filtering in from the city outside. His skin was burning. Literally burning. He felt like he was running a fever of 105. You're hot again, she whispered. Like at the lodge. It's not a fever, Declan groaned. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling deeply. His nose brushed her pulse point, and a low, rumbling sound vibrated from his chest. It wasn't a moan. It was a growl. A guttural, animalistic sound that resonated deep in Tess's bones. She froze. Declan? He pulled back. In the shadows, she looked at his face. Don't look, he warned, his voice distorted, deeper, scraping like gravel. But she did look. A stray beam of light from a passing helicopter swept through the window, illuminating him for a split second. Tess gasped. His eyes, they weren't dark anymore. They were gold. Glowing, iridescent, molten amber gold. And his pupils weren't round. They were vertical slits. Your eyes, she whispered, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Declan, your eyes. He squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head violently. I'm trying to hold it back. Tess, run. Go to the guest room. What is happening to you? She reached for his hand, trying to pull it from the wall. His fingers were dug into the plaster, not pressing, dug in. His nails had lengthened, turning thick and dark, piercing the expensive drywall like it was butter. Declan! She yanked his hand away. The tips of his fingers were tipped with sharp, curved claws. She stumbled back, tripping over her own heels. You have claws. Tess, please, he groaned, dropping to his knees. He clutched his chest, his shirt straining as the muscles beneath rippled and expanded with terrifying fluidity. The bond. It's too strong. I can't control the shift. Shift? The word hung in the air. He looked up at her. The gold eyes were pleading, but the face. His jaw was too square, and when he opened his mouth, his canines were elongated, sharp white daggers. "I'm not," he choked out the words. "I'm not human, Tess." Tess backed away until she hit the console table. Her mind was reeling. The static, the heat, the growling. "What are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "A demon." "Wolf," he rasped, his voice sounding torn from his throat. Tess stared at him. The pieces clicked into place. The pack talk, the strength. "A werewolf," she breathed. "You're actually a werewolf." "Yes," he rasped. Tess stared at him. The man she had fallen for was kneeling on his floor, claws gouging the hardwood, eyes glowing like high beams. She didn't scream. She didn't faint. She did the only thing her brain could handle. "I need a drink," she said, and she turned and walked shakily into the living room. Chapter 24. The Paper Trail. Declan didn't follow her immediately. She heard the sound of a door slamming, likely the guest bathroom, and the sound of running water. He was cooling off. Literally. Tess stood in the center of the massive living room. Her hands were shaking. "Werewolf," she muttered to the empty room. "He's a werewolf. Gus, did you know about this?" Gus was not there. He was likely hiding from the pheromones. She needed water. Or whiskey. Or an exorcist. She wandered toward his home office. She had never been in there. He kept it locked. But tonight, in his haste, the door was ajar. She pushed it open. The room was lined with books and smelled heavily of him. She went to the desk, looking for a distraction, something mundane to anchor her to reality. On the center of the mahogany desk sat a thick file folder. It wasn't labeled Top Secret. It was labeled Asset Acquisition, S. Crumb. Tess frowned. Savory Crumb? She opened the folder. It wasn't a catering plan. It was a dossier. The first page was a background check on her, dated 3 weeks ago, just days before the pizza incident. The second page was a financial report of her bakery's debts. The third page was a copy of a building deed, the Savory Crumb building. Her eyes scanned the memo attached to the deed. Date, October 12th. From A. Sterling, Legal Department, to D. St. James. Subject, Asset Acquisition and Protection. Sir, we have successfully purchased the debt on the Bennett girls' lease before the River Group could acquire it. As predicted, Thorne was moving to foreclose to force her out. We now hold the leverage. The bank will call in the loan on the 1st per your instruction. She will be desperate for capital. Proceed with the fiancé offer. This candidate is the most logical shield for the merger. She has no family, no protection. She will sign whatever you put in front of her. Tess felt the blood drain from her face. October 12th, 2 weeks before she met him. He hadn't stumbled into her life. He hadn't accidentally hired her. The pizza incident? The mistake? It was all orchestrated. Or at least, he had been watching her, waiting for a moment to strike. He had bought her debt to ensure she had no choice but to say yes to his contract. "He bought me," she whispered. Her voice broke. The betrayal hit harder than the werewolf reveal. Being a wolf was biology. This was cold, calculated manipulation. He had looked at her drowning, not to save her, but to verify she was desperate enough to grab his hand. "Tess?" Declan stood in the doorway. He looked human again. He had changed into sweatpants and a t-shirt. His eyes were back to dark brown, though they looked exhausted. He saw the file in her hands. His face went gray. "Tess, wait," he said, taking a step forward. "I can explain." Chapter 25. The Walkout. Tess slammed the folder shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Explain?" she asked. Her voice was deadly calm. It scared her more than his growl had. "Explain which part, Declan? The part where you're a wolf? Or the part where you stalked me for months and bought my building to force me into this sham?" "I didn't force you," Declan said, raising his hands. "I offered you a deal. You created the problem so you could sell me the solution." Tess shouted, throwing the file at him. Papers scattered across the floor like confetti. "You knew the bank was going to call the loan because you owned the debt." "It started as business," Declan pleaded. He looked desperate now, more human than she had ever seen him. "I needed a candidate. You fit the profile. unattached, financial need, strong personality. But Tess, that was before. Before what? Before I met you, before the pizza, before I knew who you were to me. And who am I to you? She demanded. An asset, a shield, a pet. My mate, he roared, the word ripped out of him. You are my mate, Tess. My soul. The other half of my soul. The silence that followed was heavy. Tess laughed. It was a brittle, broken sound. Mate, is that wolf for property? Because that's how you've treated me. Like something you can buy, manage, and control. No, Declan whispered. I was trying to protect you. You were protecting your merger, Tess corrected. She reached into her purse, the small clutch she had worn to the dinner. She pulled out her wallet. From the back fold, she extracted a piece of paper. The check. The personal check he had given her in the guest room weeks ago. The allowance. She held it up. I never cashed it, she said. Tess, don't, Declan said, stepping forward. The money doesn't matter. I don't care about the money. I know you don't, she said. That's the problem. You think you can solve everything with a signature. She ripped the check in half, then in quarters. She let the pieces fall to the floor, mixing with the scattered pages of her dossier. I'm not an asset, Declan, and I'm not your mate. I'm just the pizza girl. Tess, you can't leave, Declan said, panic rising in his voice. It's dangerous. The bond. Thorn. You don't understand. I understand enough, she said, walking past him. He reached for her arm, but stopped inches from her skin. He knew if he touched her now, the static would hurt her. Or worse, he would lose control and force her to stay. And if he forced her, he would lose her forever. He let his hand drop. Tess walked to the door. She grabbed her coat. Where is Gus? She asked, her back to him. Kitchen, Declan rasped. Sleeping. She whistled. A moment later, the basset hound trotted out, looking confused but happy to see her. Come on, buddy, Tess said, clipping on his leash. We're going home. She opened the front door. Tess, Declan said. His voice was broken. Please. She didn't look back. She stepped out into the hallway and let the heavy door click shut behind her. Declan stood alone in the penthouse. The scent of her, vanilla and rain, was slowly fading, replaced by the smell of old paper and regret. He fell to his knees among the torn pieces of the check and let out a howl that shattered the glass of the balcony door. Chapter 26. The Aftermath. 3 days. That was how long it had been since Tess had walked out of the glass tower and back into her dusty, flour-coated reality. 3 days of silence. Tess stood in the center of her kitchen at the Savory Crumb, staring at a tray of unbaked croissants. The air in the bakery was warm, smelling of yeast and butter, but she was freezing. It was a bone-deep cold that no amount of sweaters could fix. It felt like her blood had slowed down, sluggish and heavy in her veins. You look like a ghost, Leo said, walking past her with a tray of muffins. Seriously, boss, you're paler than the dough. I'm fine, Tess lied, her voice raspy. Just tired. She wasn't fine. She was going through withdrawal. Her body, which had spent weeks attuning itself to the static charge of an alpha, was now screaming at the absence of it. Every time the door chimed, her heart lurched, hoping to see dark eyes and a sharp jawline, but it was never him. Across the city, the St. James penthouse was in ruins. Declan hadn't left the apartment in 72 hours. He hadn't slept. He hadn't eaten. He had spent the first day destroying the furniture in the living room, shredding the expensive Italian leather sofa with claws that refused to retract. Now, he sat on a floor amidst the wreckage of his life. In front of him, lying on a scratched hardwood, was the sapphire ring. She had left it. She hadn't thrown it at him. She had simply left it on the console table, silent and dismissing. It hurt more than if she had stabbed him. He picked it up. The metal was cold. It didn't spark. Without her skin touching it, it was just a rock. A very expensive rock that meant absolutely nothing. I bought the dead, he whispered to the empty room. His voice was a wreck, raw from howling. I bought the building. I bought the doctors for her grandmother. I bought everything. And that was the problem. He had treated her life like a merger. He had applied the brutal logic of the boardroom to the delicate chaos of a relationship. He had tried to own her because he didn't know how to ask for her. His phone buzzed on the floor. It was Martha, his assistant. "Sir, the board is asking for a statement regarding the engagement, and Mr. Thorne is calling to contest the bakery ownership. He claims the transfer is void." Declan stared at the screen. Thorne. The wolf who had wanted the building from the start. Thorne would come for the bakery next. He would come for Tess, knowing she was vulnerable, knowing she was unmated. A low growl started in Declan's chest. The lethargy vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. He couldn't buy her forgiveness, he knew that now. But he could buy himself one last chance to speak. He stood up, ignoring the ache in his muscles. He grabbed his keys. He didn't take the limo, he took the Range Rover. And he didn't head to the office. He headed to a small, greasy pizza joint on 4th Street. Chapter 27. The Special Delivery. Tess was closing up shop. The sun had set, casting long, melancholy shadows across the bakery floor. She flipped the sign to closed and locked the door. She turned around and screamed. A man was standing in her kitchen. He hadn't broken in. He was standing by the back delivery entrance, which Leo must have left unlocked. "Declan." She breathed, her hand flying to her chest. He looked terrible. And beautiful. He was wearing jeans and a black t-shirt that clung to his chest, a stark contrast to the suits she was used to. He hadn't shaved in days. Dark stubble covered his jaw. His eyes were shadowed, heavy with exhaustion, but burning with that familiar intensity. In his hands, he held a flat cardboard box. "We're closed," Tess said, her voice shaking. She gripped the counter for support. The moment he had walked in, the cold in her bones had vanished, replaced by a rush of heat that made her knees weak. "I know," Declan said. His voice was rough, gravelly. "I'm not here to buy bread." He walked forward and placed the box on the stainless steel counter between them. It was a pizza box. But not just any pizza box. It was from Tony's Slice. "I brought dinner," he said. Tess stared at the box. "You think a pepperoni pizza fixes this? You think you can just feed me and I'll forget you manipulated my entire life?" "Open it," he said. Tess hesitated. She reached out and flipped the lid. Inside was a pizza. But it wasn't the sad, greasy mess from their first meeting. This pizza was a masterpiece. It was loaded, overflowing with meat. Pepperoni, sausage, bacon, prosciutto. It was aggressive. It was ridiculous. And written on the inside of the lid in black marker were the words, "I bought the pizza place. The recipe has been corrected." Tess looked up at him, her mouth falling open slightly. You bought Tony's Slice?" "I fired the manager," Declan said, his face dead serious. "I hired a new chef. I told them if they ever serve a slice with less than 10 pepperonis, I will bulldoze the building." A laugh bubbled up in Tess's throat. She tried to choke it down, to stay angry, but it escaped. It was a hysterical, wet sound. "You are insane," she said, tears pricking her eyes. "You bought a restaurant to make a point?" "I bought it to show you I listen," Declan said. He stepped around the counter. He didn't touch her. He stopped 2 feet away, respecting the barrier. "I know I messed up, Tess. I know I treated you like a contract. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be human about this." "You're not human," Tess whispered. "No," he agreed. "I'm a wolf who found his mate and panicked. I tried to lock you down before you could run. I was terrified that if you saw the real me, the beast, the baggage, the violence, you'd leave." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. He placed it next to the pizza. "Transfer papers," he said, "for this building. I've already signed my portion. You just need to countersign. No strings, no debt. It's yours." Tess looked at the envelope. It was her freedom. It was everything she had worked for. "Why?" she asked. "Because I don't want to own you," Declan said softly. "I just want to be near you." Chapter 28. The Rematch. Tess didn't take the envelope. She stared at it, then at him. "I can't take this," she said. "It's too much. It feels like a payoff. It's a surrender, Declan corrected. I don't want your surrender, Tess snapped, the anger flaring up again. I want to know if what we had was real. The chess game, the snowstorm, the kitchen. Was any of that you? Or was it just the wolf trying to secure the asset? Declan's eyes flashed gold for a split second. It was all me, every second. He looked around the kitchen. His eyes landed on a small table in the corner where Leo played checkers on his break. One game, Declan said. Tess frowned.
What?
Chess, Declan said. One game. If you win, you take the deed. I leave and I never darken your door again. I will sell the penthouse and move to the other side of the world if that's what you want. Tess's heart hammered. And if you win? If I win. Declan stepped closer, the heat radiating off him like a physical wave. You give me 10 minutes. 10 minutes to explain everything. The bond, the pack, the reason I can't breathe when you're not in the room. It was a trap. She knew it. He was a grand master at strategy, but she remembered the lodge. She remembered beating him, and a part of her, the treacherous, foolish part that still loved him, wanted to hear what he had to say. Fine, Tess said, but we don't play here. My board is missing pieces. My place, Declan said. The marble said. Tess hesitated. Going back to the penthouse was dangerous. It was his territory. I drive myself, she said, and Gus comes with me. Agreed. An hour later, they were back in the glass tower. The living room was still a disaster zone. Shredded sofa, overturned tables. Tess stepped over a pile of stuffing, her eyes widening. Redecorating? She asked dryly. I had a bad week, Declan muttered, clearing a space on the coffee table for the chessboard. They sat on the floor, just like at the lodge. Gus settled instantly on the only intact rug, letting out a heavy sigh. Declan set up the pieces. White for her, black for him. Ready? He asked. Tess nodded. She moved her pawn. Play. Chapter 29, The Sacrifice. The game was different this time. At the lodge, it had been playful, a seduction of wits. Now it was a battle. Tess played with cold aggression. She wanted to win. She wanted to prove that she didn't need him, that she could beat him at his own game. She took his knight. She cornered his bishop. Declan played defensively. He blocked. He parried. He watched her face more than the board. Why did you do it? Tess asked, taking a pawn. Why not just ask me out like a normal person? Because I have enemies, Declan said, moving a rook. Marcus Thorne was trying to buy your debt to force you out. I bought it first to stop him, but if he knew I actually cared about you, he would have targeted you physically. I had to make it look like a business arrangement, cold, transactional, to keep you safe. So you lied to protect me? I lied to keep you off the target list, Declan said. But I underestimated the bond. I couldn't stay cold. I couldn't keep my hands off you. Tess's hand hovered over her queen. She looked at him. He wasn't lying. She could see the truth in the exhausted lines of his face. Check, she said, moving her queen into position. Declan looked at the board. He had an escape route. He could move his king behind his pawns. He could prolong the game. He could probably turn it around and crush her in 10 moves. He looked at Tess. He looked at the defiant tilt of her chin, the fire in her eyes. He didn't want to crush her. He wanted to crown her. He reached out. His hand hovered over his king. Instead of moving it to safety, he tipped it over. The heavy marble king hit the board with a loud clack, rolling on its side. Tess froze. She stared at the fallen piece. Then she looked up at him, confusion furrowing her brow. You could have moved. You had the lane. I know, Declan said softly. Why? Tess demanded. Why did you lose? Because I'm not playing against you, Tess, Declan said. He leaned forward, bracing his hands on his knees. I'm playing for you. And the only way to win you is to surrender. He reached into his jacket pocket. He didn't pull out a check. He didn't pull out a contract. He pulled out his hand, empty and open, palm up. I surrender, he whispered. My king, my pack, my heart, it's all yours. You call the shots, you set the terms, just don't make me leave. Tess looked at his hand. It was shaking slightly. The great, terrifying alpha was trembling. The anger in her chest finally broke. It didn't disappear, it just transformed into something else. Something hot and aching and inevitable. "You're an idiot," she whispered, tears spilling over. "I know," Declan said, "and you have terrible taste in pizza." "I'm working on it." Tess reached out. She placed her hand in his. Snap. The static hit them, but this time, neither of them pulled away. Chapter 30. The Claiming. The shockwave of their touch blew the air out of the room. Declan didn't wait. He pulled her across the board, scattering the marble pieces. She crashed into his chest, and his arms wrapped around her like steel bands. "Tess," he groaned, burying his face in her neck. "God, Tess." "Shut up," she sobbed, grabbing his hair. "Just shut up and kiss me." He did. He kissed her with the hunger that bordered on violence. It was a reclaiming. It was a promise. He laid her back on the rug, his body covering hers, shielding her from the world. The heat was unbearable now, a fever that consumed them both. "I need," Declan panted, pulling back to look at her. His eyes were fully gold now, glowing in the dim light. His canines were sharp, grazing her skin. "Tess, the bond. I need to seal it. I need to claim you." Tess knew what he meant. She had read enough paranormal romances, ironically, to know. But this wasn't a story. This was real. She reached up, baring her neck to him. It was a gesture of absolute trust. "Do it," she whispered. "Mark me." Declan let out a sound that was half sob, half growl. He lowered his head. He licked the sensitive skin over her pulse, soothing it before sinking his teeth in. It hurt, a sharp piercing sting, but it was immediately followed by a rush of euphoria so potent Tess arched her back, crying out. Gold light seemed to flood her vision. She felt him, not just his body, but him. His fear, his loneliness, his fierce, overwhelming love for her. It flooded into her mind, filling all the empty cracks, and she knew he felt her too. Her forgiveness, her stubbornness, her love. As he pulled back, licking the mark to seal it, the static settled into a steady, warm hum. A permanent connection. "You're stuck with me now," Declan murmured, resting his forehead against hers. "I guess so," Tess said, running her hands over his shoulders. "Does this mean I'm the alpha female?" "It means," Declan said, kissing her nose, "that you own the alpha, which is much more powerful." He reached into his pocket, pulling out the sapphire ring she had abandoned days ago. He took her left hand, sliding the cold metal back onto her finger. This time, there was no shock, just a warm, humming sense of rightness. "Don't take it off again," he whispered.
"I won't,"
Tess promised. Epilogue, 6 months later. The renovation of the savory crumb was complete. It was twice the size, with a line that wrapped around the block. Tess stood in the back, piping frosting onto a cupcake. She wore a new apron, crisp and white. On her finger, the sapphire ring caught the light. "Order up!" Leo shouted from the front. "Coming!" Tess yelled back. The back door opened. Declan walked in. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing jeans and a black t-shirt that said Official Taste Tester. He walked up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He nuzzled the spot on her neck where a faint silver scar now sat, the mark. "You're late," Tess said, leaning back into him. "Pack business," Declan mumbled against her skin. Thorne tried to challenge for territory again. I reminded him that my mate has a mean right hook. Tess laughed. "I told you to be nice." "I was nice," Declan said. "I didn't break his arm, just his ego." He stole a cupcake from the tray. "Hey!" Tess slapped his hand. "Those are for customers." "I own the building." Declan grinned, taking a bite. "Landlord tax." "I own you," Tess corrected, turning in his arms. Declan's eyes flashed gold, full of humor and heat. "Yes, you do." He kissed her, tasting of vanilla frosting and happy endings, and in the corner, Gus the basset hound let out a long, contented snore, dreaming of a world made entirely of pepperoni.